Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm very thrilled to introduce my guest today. This is Giulia Nuti. She is the author of a really fantastic treatise, monograph, The Performance of Italian Basso Continuo. And on this show, we're obsessed with partimento, basso continuo, early music pedagogy, where we're really investigating these things that really most young musicians and even older musicians, we don't know that this information has almost been lost to history. So it's really wonderful when we meet scholars, not just performers, scholars and performers. It's very sometimes it's even better when that's the combination, and Giulia is an example of that. And so Giulia, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to speak with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
So you wrote this very important book. I don't think there can be a limit to the number of books in Basso to continue. I think this is a very wonderful system, and we can dive into it over the course of this interview. But before we dive into that, can you just tell me what inspired you to write the book in the first place? Because I think people, when they think of Basso Continuo, they might be familiar with F.T. Arnold's book on the art of accompaniment. They might know C.P.E. Bach's treatise on. There's a very long thorough bass section. Some people know Gasparini. So, what motivated you to write your book on the performance of Italian Basso Continuo?
Well, really, the thing that I'm most interested in is what I find very fascinating about Basso Continuo is that it's a system of notation, and it was invented. I mean, you could say that it was invented. It was codified at the beginning of the 17th century, so 1600s. I mean, it existed from a bit before then as well, but we'll say 1600 for the sake of clarity. And it continued to be the system of notation in use for the accompaniment right up to the late 1700s and beyond, even in teaching harmony and things. And so it's really extraordinary if you consider the fact that what you have with basso continuo notation is it's the interpreter, it's the continuo player who must improvise on following certain sets of stylistic rules, obviously. But the rules that they have to follow are extremely different. So if you think the way you would play, obviously, the way you'd accompany a 17th century madrigal is obviously has to be completely different to the way you'd accompany an opera aria from 1700, which will be different to how you accompany a violin sonata from 1750. And so, but it's written in the same way. And so, and it's improvised, you see. So this is a very special situation to be in as a performer, because you have to really search for clues on how to find the right sorts of ideas that will fit with the style that you're playing in. And of course, the famous treatises that you mentioned are absolutely columns of, I used to say in Italian, colonne. They're the most important, some of the most important texts written. Arnold is a 20th century study, obviously, but also C.P. Bach is incredibly important. Gasparini is incredibly important as well throughout the 18th century. But they almost take too much, at least C.P. Bach and Gasparini almost take too much, sometimes importance. So what you risk is to accompany, if you don't have a sort of knowledge of what the difference in styles can what you're allowed to do, let's say, what the suggestions of what the ways of accompanying are, then you might just play the way Gasparini says, even if you're playing something that's written in 1620. But that's not necessarily the right way to do it, because in fact he was writing for a century later.
Right.
So it's really what I became interested in was finding more and more clues as to what how to accompany the style in which the music is written.
Right. And you're talking about a huge span of music. I mean, 1600 to what, 1750, I guess, with the death of Bach, and maybe going further than that as well. I remember looking at the thorough bass section of CPE Bach and thinking, how do I begin? I mean, where do we start? I mean, the common chords, sure, but then what about a series of chords? And then there's the rules. It just seems like there's a maze of rules, so many things, very difficult for somebody new to pick this up. So actually, before we get into that, I wanted to talk about the predecessors to Continuo, because in your book, I think you talk a little bit about this. You talk about the history. So could you just give a brief history of what happened prior to the Basso Continuo, what people were doing then, and how it eventually happened in 1600?
Sure. Before starting on that, I wanted to pick, maybe I will come back to it, but it's not difficult. That's something that's important to remember, that Basso Continuo was invented in order to be an easier way to accompany. I think this is very important to remember, because a lot of people, especially if you're coming from a tradition in which you're used to performing accompaniments which are written out, it becomes suddenly very hard to think, oh, well, I've only got some figures and a bass, and what do I do now? But it's important that, so that's what I say to all my pupils, it's easier to play. The basic rules are very, very simple. And so we'll get to that when we get to the 17th century, which is when they start codifying.
So this is going to be great. I love that you said that it was easy, and that's going to be really reassuring for a lot of people who are interested in this. So, okay. So shall we go back in history now?
Yes.
Okay.
So in the so yes, I said at the beginning, we normally consider Basso Continuo to have been codified in the 1600s. So before that, what happened? One of the I think it's fair to say that one of the most usual ways to, one of the most well, it was basically counterpoint and polyphony were the two most practiced ways to compose. So if you're a composer, there you have Palestrina, who is the master of all counterpoint and polyphony. And so there was a lot of attention to large, well, not always large voices, but also, for example, choral music in many parts, but also madrigals in 4 or 5 parts. And it became, there's evidence, there are many small quotes that one can find here and there in various pieces of literature or letters and things about how if there weren't enough people to perform, say, a 5-part madrigal, then you'd call in a lutenist. I mean, this is a famous example is in Il Cortigiano, in which there's this description of how a lutenist was called in to fill in the missing parts. And so, obviously, if you imagine you've got a sheet of music on which there are 5 lines, there are 5 voices, and you're playing a lute, you don't play all of the notes that are that the voices would have sung, but you sort of simplify it a bit. You sort of play a bit more harmonically, and that's to say that goes also for keyboards. You wouldn't, well, on a keyboard it is easier to represent the actual voices that were sung, but it became more common and more documented the fact that when voices were missing, you were not filling out the missing voices, but you were sort of turning it into a block of harmony instead.
Right.
And there are examples. For example, there's Villaet's madrigals in 5 voices. I think there are 4 or 5 voices which are entabulated for lute, and the lute part is quite complex, but it's nowhere near as complex as the vocal part. It was entabulated by Bostonensis, who's a lute player. So there's this already some documentation of a practice of simplifying counterpoint, simplifying not in the sense that you take with the harmonic blocks and you when voices are missing. And so this was happening already in the first half of the 16th century.
And so, Julia, can I just jump in and ask you a question? Did they have five? Did they say this is a 5 chord, this is a 6 chord? Did they ever talk like that?
No.
It's just like, so what do they refer to those blocks of harmony then?
It's more a question. There's no specific. Well, this is in the first half of the 16th century. I don't know, at least, of any specific figuring as yet. But you get these descriptions saying there was a singer missing, so we called so and so with his lute or his guitar, and he played the harmonies, and so you can put forward a hypothesis because you don't know obviously what happened.
It's so interesting.
But you can say that
we're playing these chords that we don't label. That's so interesting.
No, but it's a kind of thing that you would naturally do if you're looking at a score. It also in any score reading, if there isn't a requirement or a necessity to play the parts exactly as written, then you kind of simplify them and go for the more, make sure the harmony is right, but you're not so concerned about the counterpoint. And this is something that then becomes really put into focus and into words in later years. So it makes sense. Like, I mean, nobody can say what exactly they were playing, but it does make sense to. I mean, I'll come on to that. In the 17th century, they authors start really to write. It is not necessary to represent all of the parts as they are written. It's enough to play the right harmonies, and so it's a kind of confirmation of a practice which already exists. That's the idea. Going back to the 16th century, then in 1553, there's an important publication of Diego Ortiz. He writes the Tratado de Glosas, which is a treatise, but also a book of music for viol, for viola da gamba. And he actually writes one of the first descriptions of what is basically, he doesn't call it basso continuo, but he says, during these pieces, he says, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him. I can find the quote if you want, but he's basically saying the organist should play, or the keyboard player should accompany with simple chords and add some counterpoint in answer to what the viola da gamba is doing where appropriate. So that's really quite accurate description of basso continuo. So you just have the bass line, you play the right chords. So if it's an F, then it's likely to be F major, and then if it's G, it's good. I mean, they're simple chords. They're not, obviously it's not a complex bass. And you can add in little tunes in answer to, you can add in even a little bit of melodic invention in answer to what the viola da gamba is playing. So Ortiz is important because he doesn't call it basso continuo, but that's basically what he's explaining. There he is. And after that, there are also other examples.
This is Italian. Is it an Italian-driven technological or musicological event? It happens in Italy.
It's difficult to know what. Well, I'd say yes. The first treatises on basso continuo in France appear almost 100 years later. It's very interesting. That's not to say that they didn't play. It's a very simple concept. This is what I was saying. It is really easy and it's very natural. It's almost impossible to imagine that you wouldn't think of it.
You're right.
As a player, if you find yourself, you're accompanying, as well with a guitar, just exactly as you described, and you've got a really complex part, you think, what am I going to do? I'll just simplify it a bit and you'll get the harmonies and it'll be fine. It'll work. That's all there is to it. So well, that's all there is to it at this stage. It then becomes much more
Yeah.
codified and elegant,
Right.
and
Right.
but when you're accompanying this, so I don't know. The treatises on Basso Continuo specifically appear at the beginning of the 17th century in
Mhm.
Italy, and in the rest of Europe they appear in 1680s.
Mm.
In France, it's not till the 1680s. In Germany, I'm not sure.
Right.
Um, so
That's a good
it's
history.
definitely the Italians were very, very keen to with this system of notation.
Right. Now, were the
Mm.
accompaniments, these intabulatura, these intabulations, were they written down in the 16th century and the 17th, I guess the 17th century, yes, but was these intabulations, were they for keyboards? Was that present? Was that a lot of those available?
Well, very often they weren't. It's one needs to be sure what exactly is meant by the word intavolatura. Isn't necessarily an intabulation or for a particular instrument. So an intavolatura for the lute would be an accompaniment written in tablature. An intavolatura of a score would simply mean that it's a score and all the parts are visible.
Oh, like a
There are 4 or 5
partitura,
parts.
right? Yeah.
La partitura,
Yeah.
yes, there is a linguistic interest in how you have to be careful
Yeah.
what
For keyboard
you don't
accompaniment?
assume that for keyboard accompaniment, as far as I know, you didn't have a special tablature. You could have a part. The organist would either play from the score, but that would be quite rare because it would be obviously quite expensive to
Mm,
print all of the parts, or you would play from the bass part. And there are some scores in which you can see voices being being added in ink, so entries
right.
of particular voices. But obviously, this is another reason why one can only assume that they were playing basso continuo, because if you're playing from a part book, you're playing from the part book of the bass part.
Mm.
You don't know what counterpoint is going on above, so you
It's just
must be
right.
playing the harmonies that go with the bass.
Can you comment on Banchieri? I guess he's talking about two different types of organists, and he doesn't like the other one, the one that is just reading from the bass compared to the other one.
Right.
So, well, what do you make of that comment?
It's interesting because when basso continuo notation, so in 1600s, when they start with the notation was introduced in sacred music. So as I said, it's the most likely thing is that they always did do it. I mean, again, it's a hypothesis, but it's difficult to imagine that they would, I don't know, have studied the parts and knew the counterpoint so perfectly by heart. They would have just played the harmonies. Viadana is one of the Ludovico Viadana publishes in 1602 I Cento Concerti Ecclesiastici, in which he gives a preface saying, okay, the organist is not required to represent all of the parts as they are written. I've put some figures in, and that's in order to make sure that you play the right chords, you play the right harmonies.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of consecration of this. There's no turning back. This is definitely is being adapted as a system of notation, and figures are being introduced. So it's so that as an aid to the organist. Now, what Banchieri was saying is that an organist should be able to accompany in composing their own part and with all the counterpoint properly in place. And he says that there are now organists who just play any old chord and they call themselves organists and they don't have the proper training. Because obviously it is, going back to the fact that playing basso continuo is very easy. You just have, at this time, because the harmonies were not complex.
Right.
So unless it was just, I mean, they were complex if the composer was doing something particularly special with the text or whatever. But I mean, on the whole, they were not harmonically complex pieces. So it suddenly became very easy to do. And so Banchieri is saying, well, that doesn't count. You can't just play any old chord and then say you're an organist. Being an organist is much more you need much more to it. You need a whole contrapuntal preparation, everything.
Okay.
But the interesting is that 10 years later, he's changed his mind, and when he publishes L'organo suonarino, I think it is, that he says, okay, if you really want it, I mean, obviously there's the Basso Continuo and figures have really caught on, and so there's no turning back, as I said. And so he just got to accept it and said, okay, we play from Basso Continuo, but we must still respect the counterpoint and play properly with all parts as they should be. And so it's as if he accepts it, but he never quite likes it.
With some reservations, I guess.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Right. Okay. Now I want to talk about, I guess, the main thing, which is the Italian school of continuo playing. Because as I mentioned before in the beginning, there are a lot of foreigners who wrote treatises and very good, very famous books and well used by a lot of people. I think F.T. Arnold did a great survey of them. But
Absolutely.
maybe there are some things that are missing in this canon of information when it comes to continual playing. So maybe we could discuss that. What is the Italian school of continual playing? And we could maybe start from there.
Who knows?
We don't know. Okay, it's a short.
We don't know. It's only a hypothesis. It can
Okay.
only be. I mean, I think we need to know that our knowledge is really limited and very subjective, in the sense that so the Italian style, if I had to say one thing about it, the thing that immediately springs to mind is that it's a very rich style. It's very full of, it's very harmonically rich. It's full of, there's a lot of ornament. There's a lot of even division in the bass line. It's very loud. It's very strong. It's very present, rather like Italian instruments are compared to French, more present. How we get to thinking of Italian accompaniment like this is again, it depends in which century, in which bit of the century, in which bit of the country. So if we look at sources that are available for 17th century continuo playing, it's curious that they are all concentrated in the first decade of the 1600s. So everyone, Agazzardi, Banchieri, Banchieri, Viadana, also the introductions to operas like Marco da Gagliano and Perin Caccini, Euridice, the rappresentazioni di Anima di Corpo di Emilio di Cavalieri. All of these are all from the first decade. It's as if in the first decade of the 1600s they said, right, we're doing, as I said with Viadana, we're doing figures. There was a lot of interest in and explanation. It's not always an explanation. There's very little explanation of what people actually did. For example, in the introductions to the operas, it gives information like where people were sat and who they accompanied, and that's very interesting to know how instruments interacted. So you had a little continuo group maybe for a character, or Monteverdi, for example, says that in Orfeo he changes instruments according to the effect. So you get even one person singing the same, one character singing the same line, and he Orfeo gets this in the famous moment when he turns back and looks at Euridice, and the instrumentation changes. Monteverdi specifies. So it's very much a sort of group effect. Playing continuo is a group effort. It's to do with many different types of instruments playing together. And what sounds can be achieved and what effects can be achieved. All the instruments are playing from the same bass line. This is the thing that's really cool about continuo playing, continuo notation, is that you have just one line and this thing with figures, with these figures system, and you can play off it from, if you play lute or theorbo or harp or guitar or viola da gamba, organ, harpsichord, everything, even
They all can
violins,
join in,
and
I guess, right?
they
And
can all play from it,
mm,
and realize the bass in the way that suits their instrument best. So this is the advantage over having, for example, a lute tablature or a theorbo tablature, or
which is written down and
a written out
fixed. Yeah,
accompaniment,
right.
or a written out accompaniment for the keyboard. That's always the same. Whereas if the whole point of freeing you from this notation is that you can do what works best in that moment, or with that particular singer, or so it gives these instruments a very great degree of responsiveness, which a fixed accompaniment wouldn't do.
But now I have so
Maybe
that
I've slightly
no.
moved
This is
away.
perfect. It's perfect because I want. It seems like yes, there's a couple of good important treatises, but just like what Professor Giorgio Sanguinetti told me, Partimento was dead, gone, extinct. All these old masters gone, and so and it didn't help that they were. It was an oral tradition, and it didn't help the circumstances of history. So in the Basso Continuo in the 17th and 18th century, I mean, I feel like for instance, the partimento, so all of that is like a closed community where it's like master and pupil, and musicians didn't reveal secrets, or like it's just like professionally you didn't want to reveal
Yeah.
your method of accompaniment or something. Is that something that a sense of that you see historically, like? We can get an impression, but we don't really know the fine details. Or maybe you do know the fine details, so you can help me.
No,
What is
wish
the
I
question?
did.
What is the question? What is the situation there? With do we find that a lot of stuff has been lost to history, at least as part of the oral tradition?
Well, yes, because obviously improvisation, I mean, is there's always often people compare, early music to jazz. I'm not sure that always does work,
Hmm.
but it is true that the same way that if you were to try and improvise something in the style of a jazz player, it would be very difficult to do. I mean, you could listen to recordings, but if somebody imagine if
Imagine if
those
there are no
recordings didn't
recordings.
exist,
Even worse,
then
now
what would
there's
you
no
do?
recording.
You'd have to make do with I don't know, a description, somebody who wrote a letter to a
Yeah,
friend saying, "Oh, it was really cool yesterday. We went to hear so and so,
and that's what
and
we
they were
have, right?
doing this." And that's it, what we have. So of course, we don't have any record of
Okay, wait. But
what the
what about
improvisations sounded like.
I have something. What about Tonelli's Basso Continuo accompaniments to Corelli's was it Opus 5 or something?
Opus 5. No, that's fascinating. The problem is that with as with any written down accompaniment, the moment you've written it down, it's no longer being improvised. So it can only be an example of the things that can be done. So you have to take it at that value. You can't assume that it's really what is the most desirable type of accompaniment for
Fair
that
enough.
for that piece. Very often there are examples of attempts to write down accompaniments, especially in the 18th century, and some of them are extremely strange, which is why you then have to, I mean,
What
strange,
examples are they?
unexpectedly rich. Well, there's this aria from the manuscript in Rome, in the Accademia dei Lincei. I've got it up on the harpsichord actually, because it's very famous in the world of continuo playing because it's so full, and it's full of accciaccature and dissonances. So
Would you want?
I can
Yeah.
play a bit.
No, but actually, is there a way to play what like a simplified version first? Like like some.
Sure, but I'll play first the two lines. So it's a song. It's an aria for soprano and bass. So it goes like this. I'll just play the first phrase for simplicity. Okay, so if I were doing a sort of simple, nice accompaniment, I could do something like. That sounds okay. And that's just simply, I mean, as you can hear, the harmonies are straightforward. But the way it's been harmonized, it's an anonymous author, so we don't know who he was, basically. And also, it's rather bizarre because it comes after sort of 300 pages of a treatise on harmony. And so you think, well, what on earth could you mean by writing out this thing after? But the thing is, he writes a little paragraph just before saying, despite the fact that I've just gone on for 200 pages about harmony, the way you actually accompany is more like this. But because when you accompany, you can't really be that sure that you've that you've prepared all the dissonances and don't double any of the voices, and you've resolved everything properly, because it's better to have you need an effective accompaniment, not a correct accompaniment. So this is a great little source for anyway. So this is what he writes. I'll do it this bit in slow motion so you can appreciate the fullness of the chords.
A lot of notes, yeah.
And every chord is full of sort of note clusters. My favorite one is. And also the final chord has an E. It's not just D minor, it's D minor with an E in it. So it goes. So it's.
What year was that? When was that?
It's approximately 1700. There isn't a date, a date on the manuscript, but it's.
That's fascinating, and it shows it's free. I mean, the E with the D, the 9 just there, and so it's like if you read any harmony book, it would be just you have to do these consonances and dissonances, and then as a student, I'm always aware of them and kind of paralyzed in a way. So, but yeah, it's good to have examples. So that would probably lead me to my question: is how would you teach Basso Continuo? I was very excited by what you said about Basso Continuo. Really, like it should be viewed as easy and as a way to get as a simplification of a harder system before. So how do people get into Basso Continuo, and how do you teach it actually?
I think it's a combination of the way I learned it was not to immediately get frightened of making mistakes with the counterpoint. Maybe it's a bit like learning a foreign language in the sense, if you're scared of, but this is a very personal point of view, this isn't in any of the treatises or anything. If you get too concerned that you're never going to that you mustn't ever make a mistake, then you don't say anything, you don't speak, and then that means you don't get to practice. But I took great heart from the treatises that say, like this one that I just quoted, the Rome one, but also Gasparini says when you play in practice, it's not always possible to do everything perfectly. And so I took that to heart, and you can't always prepare everything. You mustn't always play in 4 voices. It depends on very much on what you're accompanying. If you're accompanying something that's quiet, you may want to play just 2 voices. If you're accompanying something that's louder or more voices, then you'll want to play bigger chords, and therefore it's not possible to play as if you're composing. This is something that's also fascinating, I think, about Basso Continuo and performing Basso Continuo, because it's not the same thing as a composition, and the composers themselves, like Gasparini, who was also a composer, sort of let you off, as it were, and you don't, and say, you should know how to do it, but it might sometimes be desirable to not, play as if you're you're only concentrating on the counterpoint and the voice leading. And so to go back to the original question, what I think this made me start to play in a way where, concentrating on the harmony basically, and this is the way I encourage my own students to make sure that first, the most important thing is to get harmony and rhythm right at the beginning. And so you start with not with easy pieces, because it's not, but with more harmonically less complex pieces.
Can you give some examples of just things that would be good for new people to
well,
try?
Anything basically that was the early 17th century, because as I said, it's not easier to accompany, and on the contrary, it's actually very complicated to accompany, but it's not harmonically hard, and it's a good repertoire on which to practice responsiveness, which is also an integral part. So there are many parts of continuo playing. You've got to get the right harmonies, you've got to get the right rhythms, obviously.
And by early 17th century, did you have a composer or list of works in mind?
Well,
or like a treatise
composers
that people...
like Caccini, for example. Caccini songs are they're very pleasant and very pretty, and you can practice cadential formulas and things like that. Or Peri, the early sort of Florentine camerata type composers. Now, obviously, if you go to slightly later repertoire like Frescobaldi or Castello or Fontana or Monteverdi, it's already much more complicated, because here you have a sort of introduction of harmonies which aren't in the harmony, and so the composer writes harmonies which are not. Hang on, let me go back a second. The good thing about these early 17th century composers is because they were writing at the time in which Basso Continuo was simple, to go back to this overriding principle. Basso Continuo is simple, and in order to perform the very first operas and the very first songs that were composed with continuo notation, that by that I mean they're actually specified as being basso continuo parts, and they have numbers. Just use three numbers. You have everything is a 5/3 chord, unless it's a 6 chord, so it's a first inversion, and in that case it says, or it has a sharp or a flat, in which case it's major or minor chord. Is obviously it applies to the third, and that you can play all of that repertoire with those 3 simple rules. So that's the best place to start with. Now, obviously, if you immediately start to think, yes, but you might get a 6/4 at a cadence. Of course, you get a cadential sort of that's the most exotic thing you could have. You might have a 7th every now and then, but you're not going to have I don't know, 6/4 slashed. You're not going to have more complicated.
And that's in the early 17th century. You won't have that so much.
That's right.
Okay.
No, that's right. And this is, I mean, there's a very good description of these rules in Peri's introduction to L'Euridice. And he has just a tiny little paragraph and a tiny little stave with an example. This is in the preface to the printed edition. And he explains these 3 things. He says, that's all you need to know. Which is why Banchieri got so angry and said, what on earth are you talking about? That's not all you need to know. You need to know far more than that in order to be able to be a real organist. But that is basically what is needed to, if anyone could, anyone with a bit of knowledge of harmony could do that. And that was the whole point. It was really easy.
Yeah.
So that was, I think that's a good place to start.
Then when does it get crazy? Then when do we need to learn? Because people love those chords, 6/4/2, 9 chords. D'Andrieux has the 9 chords. When do we get to learn all that stuff and put that in?
Is this still in a sort of pedagogical?
Absolutely, yes. And then I'm also going to ask you of Basso Continuo as a vehicle for composition. I guess that's linked to partimento. But let's talk about just the learning phase first.
The learning phase. Well, Dandrieu you mentioned is, I mean, yes, he's fantastic because he his treatise is much more. It's better organized than the early very early Italians, as I said earlier. Were primarily concerned with colors that getting the instruments to play together, not so much about what the individual instrument was doing, which is also interesting, which is possibly why some of the things are harmonically simple. Well, not necessarily, but anyway. But Dandrieu is very gradual in his exercises, and he actually uses the numbers in such a way as to, there they are. You can see he puts 8, 5, 3, and then 3. I can't read it, but anyway,
let me zoom it in.
It's basically the numbers he uses corresponds to the notes you must play.
Yeah.
So they're all 5/3 chords, all those first 4 chords. But he specifies in the first case that the octave should be at the top of the chord. He gives you the order in which.
That's very helpful.
And it's very helpful, especially at the beginning, because but this is also a characteristic of French style, the French style that French composers and all the treatises were very, very strong on the fact that you had to move from a chord to the next nearest chord, and so they were very into sort of voice leading. Whereas in Italian sources, there isn't that much. It's not mentioned as often, so they were sort of more interested in filling the chords with extra harmony notes and ornamentation.
Is that because you couldn't be heard otherwise? Because they didn't have like amps back then. Do they want to just make sure that you could hear them in the auditorium or something?
I don't know. It's not so. It doesn't.
It's a good
necessarily increase volume.
We don't know.
Yes,
yeah.
Interesting, but well, there's a Frenchman, Leclerc de la Vieilleville, who says it was to do with showing off. That the continuo players always wanted to, because it's this improvisatory element to it. You have your bass line, but you can do whatever you want. I mean, it's you're playing it, so.
That makes sense.
And so he was saying that the cellist would do loads of divisions, and then the harpsichordist would start mucking around, and then it would all be, the composition would be completely disfigured, and nobody could hear the singer at all. So obviously that's a bit too much, but maybe it was just. Maybe they were just bored and thought they would.
Yeah,
they were playing around. I mean, you can do.
It's so rich, and it's also a span of 150 years. It's impossible, I guess, to just sum it up in 3 lines. I mean, they played this way. So yes. This whole country played it this way. Yes, I know, I can understand. Yeah. Now
it wasn't even a country. Italy wasn't even formally a country. So no, I mean, but there are stylistic differences between how they were playing in Naples and how they were playing in Venice, and or in Florence. So
great point. So let's tie this to a theme that just keeps showing up on my channel, partimento. I mean, in some ways, I guess the terms, sometimes you don't even have the word partimento. You have a different term, basso seguente or something. You have different terms thrown around. Sometimes they mean the same thing. In Germany, they don't use the word partimento, but they do something like it, and same in France. And so basso continuo as a way to teach composition. Can you speak on that topic?
Okay, so basso continuo, I don't think that it was the way to teach composition specifically, although it is inevitably tied to, I mean, if you're a keyboard player, and I speak as a keyboard player, so I don't know, it would be different on lute or harp or cello or whatever. You would, of course, train in partimenti, which is, I've always been curious as to what it would have been like. I mean, this is also one of the reasons perhaps why it's just occurred to me why the Italian style was so rich, because Italian keyboard players would have been absolutely outstanding in their improvisatory skills, because they would have been trained in partimenti. So therefore they would look at a bass, which wasn't an accompaniment of something else. It was just a bass, and they would improvise a composition on that bass. So that's what partimento teaches you to do. When you're doing basso continuo, you're accompanying something. You're accompanying someone or other people or other parts, and so you have to use more sense. You have to be sensitive to what they're doing. You have to
I see. I guess
follow them.
I notice the terminology is important here. I think that's a very important thing. So basso continuo, can you define it for me? Because we're 50 minutes into the interview, but maybe we should just define it for people. And again, there are a lot of new people who are into partimento. They're curious. This is not a dumb question. I mean, so what is it? So just so we can be clear in a musicological sense. Yeah.
Okay, I would say basso continuo is a bass line which is figured, but it doesn't have to be completely figured, or it may have an incomplete figuring, or possibly even no figuring at all. I'll define figuring in a minute. So you have a bass part to something you're accompanying. So you have a violin part or a voice part or a flute part or whatever, and a bass part. Now, the bass part is not to be played just by one single line like you would on a cello, but you realize it on a harmonic instrument, like a keyboard or a lute, or so you have to provide the harmony. You've got the melody is written out, and you have to provide the harmony. So in keyboard terms, that means that your left hand is written out, but your right hand is not written out. There's no indication of what your right hand should be playing, other than these numbers that indicate what harmony it is. But it doesn't tell you what range you're supposed to be playing in. It isn't supposed to tell you if you play high, play low, play lots of notes, play few notes, imitate play some sort of contrapuntal counter melody, don't play any melody. There are all of these things are so it's a huge part of the success of the composition, basically, because it's none of the right hand is written in. Think of it like this. The realization of basso continuo is basically what the right hand does on a keyboard. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Is a definition? Yes. Do you think that's fair?
That's very good. Very good. That's very good. Can I talk about your book for a second? I just want to bring it up because I think it's very important, and you dove into sources. And so what were just so I want people to be interested and to purchase it. So what were the things new information that you researched and you found that was new in the field?
Well, first of all, I should say that there's been an enormous interest in the field. So a lot of research which was new 10, 15 years ago is now on board the continuo research world. What was new, I found it very interesting to look at instruments themselves. So what original instruments can tell us about how to accompany. For example, often when you play an original Italian harpsichord, I'm always struck that it's much softer and more gentle than many replicas. And so maybe, as you were saying, maybe they were trying to make lots of noise in order to draw attention to the continuo playing, which now, if you do on replicas, which sometimes are much louder, then it really comes out as a super strong accompaniment. What interested me was really to have a chronological overview. So to start really in the 16th century and say this music was probably accompanied in this sort of way, and these sources back that hypothesis. I think, and then on into the 17th century, looking really at in very great detail what tiny pieces of information taken here and there, maybe from a preface to I mean, my research consisted mainly in looking through a lot of music, and then applying all of these hypotheses that one imagined that the composer or the author meant, and seeing if they actually worked, if they made sense, if it was something that could that could really have happened. And this led to I think some reevaluation of some of the sources. If you say, like for example, that aria that I played earlier, the aria was known, but nobody had sort of taken it very seriously because of this fact that it's 200-page harmony treatise, and then he writes this silly little aria, which is almost a joke because you wouldn't really. It's so full of harmony, it doesn't actually even sound particularly good as a final effect. But then if you contextualize it and put it next to solo keyboard music like Scarlatti sonatas that have the same type of chords which maybe have dissonances which aren't prepared and don't resolve, and put it next to Gasparini's text that says, no, you can't actually, even, nobody can prepare and resolve everything as it's as if it was a composition, and it's not even desirable to do so. And it was sort of joining dots together and making it and trying it out in performance. And I had the good fortune to work with a lot of collaborators and fellow students when I was studying, and then friends and other musicians who very much believed in this type of accompaniment.
Well, what was it like before? I mean, like, what was the way? I mean, it's very hard to categorize like all the research up to that point, or like just the way it was perceived. But in a sense, what was it like before these new techniques you were trying to implement, or this new style?
Yeah, I found that I was very confused as to what style belonged where. So there were a lot of principles which were in treatises, which were being kind of applied
in a general universal sense. Yeah.
In a general universal sense of this is how to play continuo. And you think, well, but as I said at the beginning, continuo in 1600 concerns certain sets of things. But if I'm playing French continuo in 1740, then it's not, I can't apply the same things. That's silly. That doesn't work. And so it was really, what interests me was felt that despite a lot of work and study with amazing teachers, I was still very unsure as to which bit stylistically fit in with which piece of music or which style of composition.
Yeah.
And that was really why I decided to make my research just about Italian music, just about very much based on original sources and not on later sources, which were sort of as much as possible trying to rely on what I would have had around me had I been living at that time, as it were. It's almost impossible, but but for example, one author who's often quoted in relation to style in Italian music is Heineken. He wrote a huge volume on
and he went to Italy, right? He went to Italy.
That's right. He was a pupil of Gasparini, and so very often.
So surely he's the guy, right? He's that's it.
Well, is he? That's the question. And my
good German lawyer went down there like a good German, wrote everything. So
sure, and there are lots of Italian, some realizations of Italian music are very much based on his testimonies. But I was not interested in that. Not interested because it's not interesting.
No, I
It's
know what
very
you mean.
interesting and very important.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to start by saying, okay, so there's this German source that talks about Italian music, so I'll start with that because it's got lots of detail. That was sort of a position that I found quite often. Everyone was sort of saying, "Oh, why don't you read Heineken?" I said, "Well, no, I've read Heineken, but that's not the point. I'm more interested in seeing what I don't know what that funny manuscript with just a bass line actually means." And so going into going back to trying to work out how a keyboard player would have trained at that time, and so this goes back, of course, to the partimenti tradition. And
well, how did they train? That's a good question. Like did they study? I'm just like, okay, so the children learn the keyboard, they play pieces, but I would imagine they would be in a church or something, or in a part of some group, and then they pick it up, right? Or so how did they learn?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it depends if you were in a conservatorio or I mean, there's certainly in Italy, unlike France, there isn't a tradition of amateur players. So, and I think this is also interesting stylistically. In Italy, it was very much seen as a profession. You were trained to be a musician. And this also ties in with the thing of professional secrets, of course, just as you would learn to make a pair of shoes or sculpt a piece of marble, but you wouldn't find a book that tells you how to make a pair of shoes or to sculpt a piece of marble. You wouldn't find a book that tells you how to improvise on a bass line. You would have a teacher who would show you how it's done. And then going on to say, if you were a sort of aristocratic or noble Italian man or woman, you would have a musician or a bunch of musicians to play at your court. You wouldn't yourself play, or it would be unusual, or it wouldn't be. Unlike in France, where, for example, Louis XIV was played the harpsichord, and or Henry VIII in England was, or Elizabeth I was a great virginal player. There was a very different kind of
wow.
A very different sort of approach, and you see that in the treatises which appear in France. There are so in Italy, as I said, there are the first 10 years of the 1600s in which there are about 10 titles come out. Then there's almost nothing, so 2 or 3 books published, Penna and somebody's Mantova maybe. And then there's Gasparini, and then there's nothing else. I mean, there's sort of 1 or 2 in the whole of the 18th century. Whereas in France, from when they start being published at the end of the 17th century, there's a treatise every couple of years, every 2 or 3 years, and they're all aimed at beginners. Well, not all of them, but a great number of them, most of them.
Was Gasparini aimed at amateurs? Who was Gasparini's?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a sort of general recap of the style, which was badly needed because nobody had written about it. Well, in fact, there are bits of Gasparini which are copied into manuscripts, or maybe it was the other way around, but I don't think so. I'm sure it was Gasparini being emulated. I think he just sort of, in 1708, I think it was published. I mean, nothing had been published for almost 90 years. I mean, there'd been a couple of generations had gone past since the last treatise on Basso Continuo. So the field was his, and again, maybe he saw that in France there was, I don't know, never occurred to me before, but maybe that there were treatises starting to appear. So to go back to your original question, I don't know. I think as a child you would have started to play if you had to begin to learn the skill, or
One of
yeah,
these
I mean, it was
long apprenticeships for many years.
yes,
I,
yes.
now I wanted to end off with the end of Basso Continuo creativity and
Mm.
that theme. Can you speak on that theme? What's happening there?
Well, my idea. I think that, I mean, Basso Continuo, I said at the beginning, we start off in 1600 and even earlier, and the most important thing, the most striking characteristic about Basso Continuo notation is that it gives the player the possibility to respond to what they're accompanying. And this is particularly important for the instruments of Basso Continuo because, of course, if you're playing a lute or a theorbo or a harp, you have got some dynamic possibility. You've got a lot of dynamic possibility, but it's very effective if you do full chords and then empty chords. This is the whole idea behind it, and this is why you can't compare it to composition and play always in a contrapuntal way. On the harpsichord, it's even more important because it's the only way basically you have to be responsive. So if you're playing 2 notes, then it comes out quiet. If you play 10 notes, then it comes out as a loud chord. And so you're actually using the number of notes that you're playing to give volume and texture to the accompaniment. And you can't write that down, which is why nobody did. And it remained an improvisation. Now, towards the end of the Baroque era and the beginning of the classical era, the composers sort of started to be more specific in their requirements of over their control over interpreters, for want of a better way of putting it. So they were
Very
writing
explicit
more specific
instructions.
things,
Yep.
more dynamics, more accompaniments were starting to be more composed. So, for example, if you look at a Mozart violin sonata, the piano part is entirely composed. It's no longer in continuo. Although Mozart was still writing, there's still parts of his piano concerti where the tutti come in, where he figures them. So it's not by any means been abandoned as a way of composing
But there's a greater
or
sense of the
writing.
composer's wishes needing to be preserved in the performance.
And I think it's partly to do with that, and partly to do with the instrument. If you play, if on a piano or a forte piano, which you would have by the 1770s, 1780s, you'd have very developed, very beautiful, very sophisticated forte piano. Then you no longer need to use the number of notes. You can do what's written. The composer will write your part, and you can adapt your part according to your performer, according to who you're accompanying, without having to change what's actually written. So you can. So you didn't need to use the notes to to do forte and piano. You can do it on your forte piano without.
Right.
You can be expressive. It's a different type of expressiveness. The expressiveness in the accompaniment is no longer achieved by the composition of the accompaniment itself, which is what basically a continuo play is doing, which is what fascinates me about it.
Yeah.
But you can be expressive with what the composer has actually written, which it's what they were moving towards during,
Right.
towards the end of the 18th century, I think.
Well explained. Very well explained. Now, I have actually 2 questions, but I want to bring an audience question. So there's a very nice audience
Yes.
question here that I think we should bring up for a second. So this is
Yes.
Gasparini and the acciaccature and his mordenti. Are they really used by basso continuo players? They and if you compare it to the French ornaments,
Sure.
what do you think? Should we use them or should we not use them?
Absolutely. Yes. It kind of ties
Or
in with
really,
what
actually,
I
the
was.
question is, are they really used? Sorry.
Are they really used? I'd
Yeah.
say by continuo players today. Yes, absolutely. They are. I think now the level of continuo playing is very high, it's very sophisticated, it's very interesting, it's very varied, and certainly, because the thing is that about the Gasparini's acciaccature and mordenti, they're very instrument functional to the instrument, so they make sense to play. They're not strange to play as ornaments, in the sense they're not strange to play. So this is going back to how Basso Continuo is performance based. It's very natural to play. I mean, what Gasparini's, I'm looking here if I've gotten an example of one to play. Yes, so this is from his Armonico Pratico, and he says these notes must be all played together. And this is the example he gives. So that's the chord. If I play it all together, it comes out. So it's very natural.
I like
to arpeggiate a chord on the harpsichord, and then to introduce an extra note while you're
very nice.
the chord. So it does make sense on the instrument, and therefore it passes the test as a continued practice that makes sense, and therefore
worth doing and
worth
is
doing.
Used and
yes, it's very likely
highly endorsed. Would you say?
Yes,
go for it.
Absolutely, okay. Because there are many. I mean, there are many sources when you contextualize Gasparini's. There are there's a lot of solo music which uses the same practice, and I'd say absolutely continuo players today are playing in that way.
Great.
And we don't. And going back to what we said before, the fact that it is true that it goes against the rules of counterpoint, but Gasparini says that's okay. So we don't mind.
That's it. It's good. And so there is one question I did want to ask, is you are a wonderful player of repertoire as well. There's people can check out beautiful performance of Scarlatti sonatas on YouTube. Please watch that video. And you're also a very experienced teacher on Basso Continuo. Classical improvisation is seeing a surge in improvisation, accompaniment, more ensemble playing, composition, improvisation. As someone who improvises accompaniments and plays repertoire, does that change the way you play repertoire? I mean, are they two different worlds, or do you find yourself there's a little bit of a blending? Sometimes there's some influence from your continual playing, maybe changing the way that you play repertoire. Is there any sort of cross influence, or are they separate worlds that don't intersect?
No, absolutely. They are the one and the same thing. I think it's very important that not to specialize. If for a harpsichord player, at least, I'd say not to specialize in just one, either repertoire or continuo. They're not very. They're not
mutually exclusive
compartments. Yeah. Yes, and I'd say rather than continuo influencing solo music, it's the other way around. That it's this solo music that the ability to the skills you acquire when you're from solo repertoire are work very well in continuo playing. If you have a continuo player who's not very used to playing a lot of repertoire, for example, somebody who comes to the harpsichord from the piano, say, then maybe they're very proficient in playing the right harmonies and things. There's a lot of work to be done on getting to, how to spread a chord in the most effective way, and things which are intrinsically to do with how you play the harpsichord. And this is something that you practice in the instrument's actual repertoire. So definitely, I'd say performing solo music helps continuo playing, and also for ornamentation, for adding trills and things like that. If you've played a lot of say French music, which obviously has a lot of detailed ornamentation for the right hand, you can add that sort of thing if you've got those sorts of formations in your hand, with those sorts of trills and dexterity in your hand, you can add that to your improvisation.
Do you have any
in
specific
continuo.
composers that you have taken from that you enjoy that has informed your continual playing?
I'd say for Italian continuo playing, it would have to be Scarlatti. Both Alessandro and Domenico Scarlatti. Domenico, in particular, some of his sonatas, the way he uses chords to, not in all of his sonatas, obviously, because some of his sonatas are just very linear, two voices. It depends what he's doing. Each sonata, all of his sonatas have got different sort of games going on in them. But in the sonatas which he's playing around with chords, he adds dissonances and he changes the shapes of the chords in the right hand, and he changes the shapes, the number of notes he uses, and he does precisely this thing which has nothing to do with counterpoint, of adding dissonances and
Can you
removing
mention
them.
a particular sonata, a bunch? Is there
I'm
any that come to
trying
mind?
to think. I off the top of my head, I can't. I will write them into you, and then you can add them at the end. I don't know the K numbers off by heart, but there's a famous one in D major.
That's fine. Yeah, just send them to me. I'll put them in the description. Yes. Yeah, that sounds really great. Well, I mean, what can I say? The great Giulia Nuti, she has a tremendous book, and I've learned so much. The Performance of Italian Basso Continuos, Style and Keyboard Accompaniment in the 17th and 18th Centuries, with Ashgate Publishing. I mean, it's really been really delightful, Giulia, and I really hope you'll come back again. And
I'd love to. Thank you.
Do you have a comment on have you seen any change in your career? Have people been more interested in Basso Continuo or in this sort of improvisational aspect of classical music? Has that changed in recent years?
Oh, definitely. There's been a massive sort of expansion in the research in Basso Continuo and all related improvisation in this field. Absolutely. When I started my research, it was the end of the 90s. So it's almost over 20 years that I've been doing it. And when I started, there really were the main the main text, which were not incredibly specific, but now we've reached a level of specification which is amazing, amazingly detailed, and there's been such an enormous expansion of the research, especially in partimenti, which is so closely related to Basso Continuo, which before, even 20 years ago, there was.
Did you hear the term before that? When did you hear that term, partimenti?
Yes. I did hear that at the time in the 90s it already existed, but there wasn't so much. There wasn't anywhere near as much information out there or research having been done on it. So and also that's from the research point of view, but also from a performance point of view, there's now a lot more variety. I think a lot more experimentation. Some things work, some things are less successful, but on all sorts of areas, for both for the instruments that are being used and the ways of accompanying. It's really, yes, there's some great things being done.
Wonderful. Well, Giulia, it's been a pleasure. You're a really great guest, and I really hope to speak with you soon. The book is The Performance of Italian Basso Continuo. Giulia Nuti, thank you for being on the show. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.